taken aback also by like how much she wrote in the 10th anniversary edition, and then how much happened from the time it was published, and now that we're reading, and then how much more of a revolution is kind of happening now, as
Right.
opposed to when she thought there was supposed to be another awakening and revolution. So
Right.
yeah, I just thought that was amazing.
Because
I
she's,
think, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I think that's what I appreciated about that this edition, Marta, is the different, like she's able to reflect. It offers a reflection as to where we were, where we are, and you know, not to get caught up in the whole you know, she does a really good job about listing the differences of this. Don't get caught up in just because we had a Black president that we don't have all of these other systemic issues going on, and you know, and how quickly we can revert back and how quickly we have reverted back, or you know. And so I think that's what I appreciated about this edition, the 10th, is that she offers that reflection in her forward.
Yeah, it makes me think of, you know, yesterday was whatever yesterday was, Indigenous People Day, you know, and how probably 10 years ago when she wrote that book, we were still saying Columbus Day. We were, you know, some of us, you know, were still kind of, you know, some of us were aware and enlightened, but not all of us. And
Right.
even thinking about, you know, how I say my people were enslaved as opposed to slaves, you know.
Right.
And I mean, I'm still catching myself saying that, like, you know, this or whatever. And so now I'm like, no, they were enslaved. They were not slaves. They were enslaved. You know what I'm saying? That sort of thing. So I get, you know, I'm sure you can be you know, an expert at something and still, you know, because it's been indoctrinated in us for so long, you know. You are what you do, and, you know, that's supposed to carry with you for the rest of your life. So I get it.
I think the good thing is that there are forums like this where when everybody comes together, you kind of get an idea that everybody's kind of learning together some of this, you know, like indigenous people and saying enslaved people. And I think Just Mercy was where I was reading that, you know, because I had been saying slaves up until then, I think.
Yeah.
I think also once you have done this kind of research and done this kind of work, and you come to see people as people, then you start to understand that that label is a way of dehumanizing them. And that's why I felt she had a need to rename or give them the name, because I worked in an incarcerated setting, and to say the inmates was very dehumanizing. So it's incarcerated people, right? It's
Right.
detainees. So many other words that we can use that keep their humanity as opposed to dehumanizing people.
This is Kagiso. I read this a long time ago when it first came out. And so then in rereading it, I see where she uses the term caste. And I didn't really pick that up before.
Yeah.
But then since I got Isabel Wilkerson's book, you know, she's going to be going, I haven't started that, but she I guess will be going from, you know, that point of view in terms of caste. And caste is so much deeper than class and race. Caste, I mean, from their definition, it's like something that it's like a DNA that people put in you or on you, and you can't get out. But since we are resilient people and rebellious people, we don't allow it, you know.
So like Kagiso, I read this book a long time ago when it first came out. And I actually read Caste this summer. And then I'm rereading this book now. So now when I'm looking at Michelle Alexander's use of the word caste, I'm like, yeah, she's dead on, you know. And the reason you use caste is because the way it's described in the book caste is The difference between caste and class is, if you can act your way out of it, it's class. If you can't, it's caste. And so this, I think the first chapter of this, she does such a great example of explaining how Black people have just been demonized from the very beginning with language and definitions and all of this, and how this has led to mass incarceration. And she just lays such an amazing foundation using caste and just explaining the fear and the made up assumptions. And it's just fantastic the second go around.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Tiffany, I was gonna say the same thing about the importance with the caste part of it is the permanence. You know, it's there's no the systemic barriers don't allow for the ability to get out of it. You know, with class or, you know, again, socioeconomic status, you can earn more money, but it doesn't matter if you're still in a certain caste system. It doesn't matter.
I remember being in school and studying, like I was in school for sociology, and I remember studying about the caste system, and you know, it was like a third world country thing. But for me, I was just sitting in the room quiet, but I was like, this is actually a United States thing, because it really feels like I can't get out of the oppression that I've been in all of my life. So when I read that she used the word caste, I was like, yes, I was right all along. I mean, horrible, but
horrible.
Exactly. Yeah.
What I thought about it was during the debates, it was after the debates, and one of the commentators was saying that Harris was trying not to come off as an angry Black woman. And, you know, it's like, as was said earlier, the labels. And I think this book actually, as old as I am, makes me think more about the labels that have been put on us for so many years.
Proud of that angry Black woman, because that's what I am. I mean, I could not be anything other, seeing what has been done to our people and what is being done to our people. You know, I am angry, and I mean, I don't let that stop me from doing anything positive, but I am angry, and I wear it proudly.
And I am angry also. And the thing is that you have to know why I'm angry. It's the why, as opposed to the I'm just angry. I'm not just angry for no reason.
Right, of course.
You know, I have a good reason to be angry.
So I think in chapter 1, the quote that she started off with by W.E.B. Du Bois was very powerful, where it says, "The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery." So that part just gave me goosebumps. Like, I read this book a long time ago, but now like I'm just rereading it. And I just wanted to point out that quote, because even reading it again now is just giving me goosebumps. And I think that's a very powerful thing to start with.
It's so powerful. You know, just slavery was horrible, but when you look at Reconstruction and what Black people were able to achieve in such a short period of time, you know, with no holds barred, with no boot on our necks, and we were able to get elected to office and become educated and to become self-sufficient, that fills me with such pride. And then to just know what's coming after Reconstruction, and it's going to be short-lived. It's so sad. And that quote was perfect, just like you said.
And that the cycle continues. I mean, it's slavery, Reconstruction, then we go into Jim Crow, civil rights, and then we elect Obama, and now we're right back to where we were almost. So for me, it was the systemic impact was just so evident in that quote. I agree that it was just a great place to begin with. We get to stand in the sunshine for just briefly during these ups and downs and cycles, and then something happens and poof, it's gone. And when she talks about coming from the watch party when Obama was inaugurated or elected, and she stepped out into the street and she saw, the first thing she sees is the Black man being victimized by a policeman on what should have been and otherwise such an uplifting night.
That was part of the, I'm sorry. That was part of the book that I actually, in the first chapter, that I really got me thinking a lot. When she talks about, the Obama administration and, that moment that we all thought it would be, and it was in a lot of sense positive, but also like it pushed us to go into this colorblind society. And that was something I, for the first time, this is something that I really put a lot of thoughts to. And like when she talks about how, the mass incarceration topics and stuff like was put on the side and then moved to mass deportation, like like the Obama administration had the highest percentage of mass deportation in history. So I was just like blown away to see that and like really think about that. And it was just like a really interesting perspective because we definitely elected the first Black president, but it didn't, I guess it didn't move towards the point that we all wanted to. Instead, it was just put under a rug and, we pretended that things were not there. And then after the Obama administration, it's just like, it exploded and people were so comfortable of being, very nationalistic and all of these things are happening now. So it was just like a really interesting perspective for me to like think about.
So I haven't gotten the book yet, y'all. Bear with me. However, don't start, Tiffany. Okay, I still got some information. Okay, jeez. Nonetheless, this is still, I can still like piggyback off of what y'all are sharing because as of the last couple of months, I've taken classes around the history of American policing, introduction to gun studies, as well as currently taking a race class and revolution class through Mayday, the organization. And to piggyback off of the quote that was said about the sunshine, they were in this article titled Who Freed the Slaves, Emancipation and Its Meaning. It breaks down the players involved with the Emancipation Proclamation, right? And there is this passage that I wanted to share with y'all that says, "When then was the point of the proclamation? It spoke in muffled tones that herald not the dawn of universal liberty, but the compromised and piecemeal arrival of an undefined freedom." And when I hear that passage, it makes me think about these moments of sunshine, right? It talks about like when I'm learning about the Black codes, like that was the beginning of mass incarceration, where the people down south, the slave owners trying to restore at any possibility what replicated or resembled slavery, it's like, all right, boom, let's hit these Black codes. And that came before Jim Crow, so there's always been this system. And when you read how enslaved Africans who were on the run, who were fugitives for their own freedom, go to the Union Army and think that serving in that military is their only solvent for freedom, right? That's still replicated now. So like when I hear about the new Jim Crow laws, when I think I'm hearing what you're saying, it's just like, I had to pose in the question, well, when were we free, right? If the minute we get a glimpse of self-sufficiency, the other comes in and takes it. It's like you want segregation, but then you won't let us be self-sufficient. You know what I'm saying? So you don't want us to be integrated. You don't want us to be segregated. It's like, where does the sun shine for more than 5 minutes?
It doesn't.
Right. And it then posed and then I'll just shut up at this point. It just has me rethinking what it means to be in struggle. What parts of struggle am I complicit in? Like, struggle shouldn't be the only thing without the end in sight. And I feel like that's where we are in this moment. So I'm curious to see how she talks about that in relation to mass incarceration, because that again is another form of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the way what she says about, which I believe, you know, in thinking about her words, that like the back in the day, the civil rights movements, the human rights movements, they didn't consider mass incarceration as you know, a racial thing, or they didn't include it in the human rights or civil rights thing. It was like something that was separate. So those brothers and sisters who were incarcerated, they were separate from people who wanted to do from affirmative action or other kinds of struggles. And she puts it together, you know, that this is just part of the whole picture, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that, you know, like you guys have said, mentioned system. That's what it is. It's not like this is a bad cop and that's a bad guy or whatever. The system stinks to high heaven. And that's why, you know, I feel it's in the DNA, you know. And so in order to change that system, there has to be a revolution. I don't know how. I don't know, you know, I'll probably be dead by that time, but because I'm kind of old now. But there has to be, you know, some kind of revolution to change the system.
Do you think there's a revolution happening now, or at least the beginnings of one?
I don't know. Because I don't know if we're changing the system. I mean, I give all the credit due to all the young people, middle-aged and older people who are struggling. I mean, I struggled through the time, you know, civil rights and back in the day, and being revolutionary and doing all sorts of stuff. But the system remains the same, and I don't know how that changes. I don't know. So that's, you know, I'm still thinking about that.
I want to ask Stephanie, as a young activist, do you think the system is changing?
Thank you for your question. So this is perfect to answer that question. It is, the system is changing. I mean, I know that folks are trying to introduce like pre-arrest diversion programs for young people. I know that the text mentions like practices of transformative justice and restorative justice as well. But I think that what she's making clear to is that it's transforming. So one of the things that she kind of leaves us with in the new preface is how now there are digital jails being created. Mm-hmm. So now the money is being made with surveillance, digital surveillance technology to be able to house people in their homes. And so I don't think that, it's changed in that it's morphing into other, I guess, monsters. I guess like the monsters just kind of like morphing into other things at a rapid pace. And I have really close experience with it recently. Part of why I took time off is because my father was detained by immigration and held in a federal prison for 3 months earlier this year. And I've been taking care of my father, who's on house arrest indefinitely. He's facing over 20 years and deportation. And I've been dealing with that situation these past 3 months. Well, since February. This happened in February. So from February till now, I've been dealing with this issue really closely. My father can't go anywhere. He has 5 minutes that he can go outside. He has a monitor on his ankle 24/7. He needs to charge it all the time. And I asked myself, like, wow, this company that Michelle Alexander is citing, is the company that makes the ankle bracelet for my father. You know what I mean? And I think that's where I think our images of what the system is, it's really so closely tied to white supremacy and capitalism as the driving force, as like the soil, as the poison, because it's not soil, it's poison that keeps this growing. And I think she points to that in the beginning of it. And I think it isn't a easy answer. I think about countries like Cuba that don't criminalize anyone under the age of 16. There's no law that anyone under the age of 16 can break. So for the young people, who are, let's say, who do something that would be considered criminal, the law, were applied to them, they instead get taken to a school. There's no prison for young people under 16. It's a school, and they're given a social worker. They work with their parents, and they work with a popular educator, a psychologist, and a psychiatrist to get them rehabilitated. And the biggest one in Cuba has 20 kids. So I think about, like, wow, what are the possibilities of, like, imagining another way of rehabilitating our people? Because one of the things she also makes clear is that the prison itself does not work from preventing more violent crimes or anything like that. It's inherently made to continue to be a cycle. And one of the things I guess I do appreciate is that she takes the time to say, well, these are popular questions that I've been asked. And, she talks about why she focused specifically on Black men. A big critique was like, oh, the fastest growing population that's being incarcerated right now is Black women. Why wasn't that the center of this text? She speaks to that. She talks about how, her experience was only related to that, and that she leaves it up to others to fill in the gaps and everything. But she is still very much invested in the gender binary in this analysis too, right? So we're not considering folks, what happens to trans people, Black and brown trans women, and trans folks, and how that system affects them, and that whole other experience. So she names her shortcomings at the beginning, which I appreciate, for us to give us more critical eyes and questions as we continue to read the text. And I've never read it before. This was my first time reading it, while also going through something really closely. And I know I'm not the first or the only person in this virtual room, that has dealt or been affected by, this system. You know what I mean? And it's a privilege to be able to talk about it as I'm talking about it now as well. And I understand that too. So I also just wanted to answer that question in a long-winded way.
That was good.
I think with time, I think we'll see what else she has to offer. But
what's interesting about, well, just to follow up on your statement, pointing out some of the issues with the book. I think it was Kajiso who talked about a revolution, but how much has changed in identity pop, and I say identity politics in a good way, that we are recognizing all of these different groups and the generational societal traumas for trans people, for queer people in general, how up until recently, it was perfectly fine to call somebody a slave or to call somebody an inmate as though that was their first name, or, it was it was a legal system, but although it was like some proper way to refer to humans. And all of this has only happened in the past 10 years. Now, that said, we also have had a prison industrial complex bonanza that it probably started under Clinton, but it really bloomed under Obama. I mean, in the book, she talks about one of the largest contracts ever given was to that same company, which now calls itself Core Civics. It was originally Correction Facilities of America, I think, or something like that. $1 billion contract, you know, to house, again, what we used to call illegal immigrants, you know, to house people who are trying to come into this country. And, you know, we're just, capitalism is keeping this system alive and well. And it's hard, if you don't break capitalism, you can't break this system, so.
I think she highlighted something and said that slavery, I think she quoted Brian Stevenson, who wrote Just Mercy, but she said slavery didn't end, it evolved. And I think that just, you know, summarized everything that we have been dealing so far, like through mass incarceration now, you know, evolving to tech and replaced by tech. So it's never ending, and it's just, it's being replaced by something. And like thinking about, you know, all of those things, like from segregation to the war on drug and arresting people with any, like, you know, carrying of drugs and stuff in such a misdemeanor way. And, you know, it's just evolving. It's not ending.
Can I speak to, I'm sorry. Sorry. I think that's the important part. Like Stephanie said, and like Liliana pointed out, is it's just a different name we're putting on something. And let's not get caught up on the simplicity of just because we're home, that we're not under bondage, or we're not incarcerated. And you know, that technical and digital incarceration is still incarceration. Let's not get, you know, on the fluff of the matter. You know, she tells us, let's not forget that a change in the system is not the same as a complete destruction of it. And she warns us of those things as you know, to take a critical analysis of the systemic situation, and, you know, and look at it from that lens. When she even breaks down the numbers, and she says how, when she gives the example, I forget the exact details, but she gives the examples of the 10 inmates on one row that are lifers, and then the 10 inmates that are non-violent offenders, but are coming in at a much higher number. But the way the data is represented, it's skewed. And so for those that don't take a critical approach, it looks like it's working, but let's look at all the flaws in the system before we say that it's working.
I think we have to look at what the system is designed to do. And the system is, as she calls, racialized social control. So if your end goal is to have control over a certain population, it doesn't matter how you do it, whether it was through slavery, mass incarceration, education, you still want a certain group marginalized and kept out of mainstream America to benefit from what they can produce for themselves. For me, when I read the book, it's like, you know, people are making money and profiting off of Black and brown bodies, but the people who own the bodies are not allowed to profit off their own intelligence, their own creativity. So if it's racialized control, then in effect, the system, whatever you call it, works. And the question then becomes, you know, like, how do we get break that down, you know, because that's the real fight.
I agree with you, and I was going to add to that. When she talks about the new Jim Crow, it's not really incarceration that's the issue. It's what you call social, that racialized
social control.
Social control. That's what it's about. And if we don't start with the root of this problem, and the root is not the incarceration, because I worked, first of all, my son went to prison at 16 for 25 years to life at 16 in this country, and had never been in trouble before, was at 16, right? And then when it was time for him to come back into society, that they had started looking at how they had put all these 16 and 17-year-old kids in prison, and they started letting them all out as grown men. And thank God for organizations that they organized within the prison system themselves. They came out more radicalized and more willing to do some of the work that needed to be done in their own communities. But what I wanted to say, incarceration and policing started with enslavement. The patrollers were out to bring back the runaway person, right? And bring them back. So that's how all that started. So they never respected our bodies, and they never respected us as being human. I think what will help change this is when brown and black and people of color understand this is not unique to black people.
Right. Right. And the thing is, in slavery times, we didn't have jails. There were no prisons. Prison system didn't evolve until black people were free, emancipated, and then all of a sudden now we need to control all of these new free black people, because now you have no loitering laws, you vagrant laws. You can't stand around. There's sundown towns and all of this stuff like that there. When they were enslaved, you didn't need to control them because they were already being controlled.
But the 13th Amendment with the butt clause and the incarceration of these people put them back into slavery.
Back into, and it was for little things. And you're doing serious time for minimum crime, you know, just standing around, you working on the chain gang for 10 years and you haven't done anything. You know, you're sharecropping. That's not a job where you're going to be able to provide for your family, yet and still a lot of people were in jail behind that, under that system. So it just goes on and on and on. And as Liliana said, it evolved.
And a lot of them were also, that were in prison, were rented out to work on farms. And
that's how the roads got built.
Right. And to work, to bring in crops, to bring in cotton, sugar cane, tobacco. And that was the workforce that they lost. They found a way to get the workforce back with these small, with small reasons to imprison, to re-enslave them.
Over again. And if you look at the communities that were thriving, that were Black communities doing well, eminent domain. Most of your highways run through Black communities that were doing well, self-sufficient. So even Central Park was a shanty town where people where the runaway slave came to. They kicked them off the property and then created this park. So it's every time we think we've knocked down one system, another one pops up immediately in its place.
And you know what? I worry about that. What is the town that was built in Georgia just recently where like the 19 families gathered their money? Do you know, I worry about them so much right now because of that very thing that you're talking about. They're not going to let them be at peace. I would love, you know what I'm saying? Like the idea of it's so beautiful, but I'm just so worried that somebody's not going to let them be at peace. And I can't see that happening because history has proven itself, and especially in Georgia and Tulsa and Arkansas. And I mean, you know, it just goes on. And especially with what's going on now, like I'm worried about them.
I know that's how you're talking about.
Yeah.
But you know, like above the smaller white, I'm just going to say smaller white folks, there is a big system of moneyed people, government people, people who have power and want power, who controlling. They control the white folks too, because they say, you know, that you're better than these niggas. That's what they say. So back in the day, you know, there was this story my father used to say, you may have heard about it, that, you know, in a small southern town, you have the black preacher, you have the black teacher, and so some white folks were jealous of them and came to the sheriff and said, but these people have more money than we. And the sheriff said, but you're white. And so that's how, you know, he controlled them. And that's how a lot of people today are controlled, you know, because I don't think the people who have a lot of money and who have power care about their own white folks, really. I mean, they, you know, but so they use them to subjugate us to, you know, to oppress us, you know, so it's, you know, so that's why that's why I don't know whether, you know, I know that progress has been made, but I don't know if this system can be overturned unless it's a huge revolution, because those people have money and they have power and they have the guns and the police are militarized and everything else, you know. So, but I hope I'm wrong. So.
I just want to throw it back old school in-person book club style to page 57. So Ron talked about how Clinton jump-started the whole mass incarceration and then Obama built on it. And then I think Greg threw out in the chat that there was a book called I think it's By Any Other Name or something like that. And it's written about Black people. And this was touched upon in the chapter too. Middle class and upper middle class Black people who just did not see through the fog and the media stories and the fakeness that was being perpetrated about their own kind and supported mass incarceration. And this included politicians. And, you know, I hate to think that Obama fell into this category, but since mass incarceration flourished under his leadership, you know, it's definitely something to look into. But on page 57, is it 57? Yes, they talk about how much money Clinton put into the prison system, how he just defunded education, he defunded housing, just everything. And the irony in that is that Clinton was referred to as the friendly president to Black people, wasn't he? They were jokingly calling him the first Black president. Yeah, and there's nothing funny about that. There's nothing brotherly about that. Like, it is just the irony of that we embrace this man and he just helped to bring down our community and contribute to the problem of incarceration.
And welfare. I mean, what Clinton
did away with the Pell Grants.
With the welfare programs also decimated the community.
Or super predators.
Don't forget Joe Biden's role in this. The crime bill was his bill, and we're still suffering.
He was a senator.
Right, as a senator.
Yep.
And we're still suffering under those changes.
Yeah, and I think it's easy for us to pick a, well, I don't want to say that it's easy, but in general, it's easy for us to pick a political side, forgetting that, you know, the drug war, you know, was started or gained momentum and power under Democrats. I mean, you know, they tended to be tougher on you know, the war on drugs, even though, you know, I think it was Reagan that coined the term "Just Say No" or whatever, the DARE program.
Nancy Reagan, yeah.
Yeah, but
well, it actually started with Nixon. The war on drugs started with Nixon.
Right,
and you have to remember too that the people in our communities, I grew up in Harlem during the crack era. I'm sure you guys know about the crack era. It was Black people in our communities who did not feel safe, who wanted something done. Not necessarily what they did, but they were asking for somebody to do something. And that's why so many Black politicians signed off on that crime bill, because their constituents were saying the grandmothers did not feel safe in their own communities. It wasn't like a heroin pandemic that they had. This crack thing was really serious in our communities. And we asked for something, not that. We didn't know that we were going to look up and your grandchildren weren't going to be there.
Right.
And your uncles and your cousins weren't going to be there. We didn't understand that. And that, I think, is the beauty of this book, because it's letting us know so we can go out and teach others what they don't know. So this doesn't come, you know, like another something like this doesn't come again, and we can fall into that trap again.
And she also said that the CIA allowed these drugs to come into the Black community to do exactly what it did.
Under Reagan.
So it's a whole, you can't look at just one part of it. You got to look at the whole, another system that was in play, that was designed to destroy the Black community and, again, control us. You know, we high on drugs. We're not competing for jobs. We're not getting educated. We're not trying to build communities and build strong families. We high on drugs. It did exactly what it was supposed to do, which is destroy the community.
It gave them cover. And it gave them cover. I mean, think about it. Back then, the people, when there was a drug problem, it was a character flaw when it was just in our communities.
Right.
Now that it's in their community, oh, let's help the poor, you know, they're sick.
Now it's
so
an epidemic.
It gave them cover.
It's an epidemic now. It's an epidemic now.
It's an epidemic, and you know, they're poor people. They can't fight this on their own. We need to get them help. But when it was in our community, we were just shiftless and weak.
Exactly.
And you're right. But back in the day, even in our communities, if you went down to Wall Street, those business people, they were buying drugs like crazy. So it was just, you know, they were never arrested. If you went to a white suburban community, those guys were smoking like crazy and they were never touched. So it was only us, you know.
Well, it's not that they're being arrested now. It's that they're dying. It's not that they're being, because they're still not being arrested. It's because, you know, little Susie Joe's father.
Right. Right. And we didn't have any airplanes bringing the drugs in from wherever they were grown. You know, we were just used. You know, there was a story about, and I believe it's true, where, you know, in our communities, like they had groups of Black and Puerto Rican and Cuban young men usually who were taking care of the community, and this was seen as a threat. And so the government told the mafia, you know, because they dealt in drugs, to flood those communities with drugs, and that destroyed, you know. So.
Something that I found very interesting was that she mentioned that when the war on drugs started, there was actually a decline on drugs, and that to me was just like, you know, this is something that is embedded in the system, meant to oppress the community of Black folks and brown folks. So it was just like, wow, like, you know, there was actually statistically a decline of that. And then something else that really like just really resonated and like really put me into thought was something that she said about how white folks they have the right, they have the privilege to have a problem, and they have also the power to address those problems in a humane way. But other than, and for Black folks, you know, it becomes like the people are the problem. So that was something that I was just like, damn, like like as I move along, it just things really hits, and I'm just like, it's just meant to, again, oppress the community of Black folks and brown community, and with these systems that are really embedded in our, you know, in our system, like in everything.
I think our problem as a people is we get cemented in certain things sometimes. So we get crumbs and automatically think we have a loaf of bread. And that was the same thing when Obama came in office. We turned a blind eye to a lot of things because we were just so happy that we were being pacified with a Black president. So I think we have to stop thinking that every time we get a little piece of a crumb, that it's a loaf of bread, because it's not. And that's just how I look at everything, and even reading this book, you know.
Right. Yeah, but I also think too, like, it's rigged. Like, I mean, there is absolutely nothing we can do, because, like, you know, we have tried everything, you know, or at least discussed everything as far as saying, like, we need to get our money together, we need to do this and that. Those same people who put those laws into place for, you know, for drugs and incarceration and all that, their kids have the marijuana. You know, they own the dispensary, and the distilleries, right? The dispensary, you know what I'm saying? And even the people who are like working, you know, like they're going and getting the drug dealers who they've released, because my father's one of them. He was released after 28 years, where like they said that this man was supposed to get life in prison, you know, like it was indefinite. Usually they'll say, you know, a certain number of years to life. It was just life. And then magically, all of a sudden, he just comes on out. You know what I'm saying? Just it's utterly ridiculous. But they're the Black people know, and even the white dispensary people know who to go get to learn how to cultivate, how to do certain things. How did you go and do this? And like now everything is fine. But I'm just like, I don't. Like there's nothing you can do, because even just to get what are they saying with the cannabis? Yeah, investing in cannabis, getting licenses and stuff. Like it still takes an act of God for Black people to even come close. Like how many now? Maybe 3 or 4 Black owned ones.
It's because it takes the profit from the you know, from the majority. It takes the profit. You know, now you're dipping into there's profit to be made now. So now it's okay to be legalized in however many countries and whatever, when most, you know, most incarcerated nonviolent offenders are for drugs. And she even mentions, jumping back on what Liliana had said, she even mentions that, you know, most of the deportations that occurred under Obama occurred from undocumented immigrants that were charged with petty possession of marijuana that's now legalized. And, you know, the system, it's all about dividing the family, you know, because she talks about that is the system tries to look like, you know, Obama's justification was, well, we're going after criminals, we're not going after families. But you know what? There's not a division. It's not one or the other. You know, you know, a person who, they're not mutually exclusive. You know, just because you could be a mom who did what she had to do, you could be a dad who did what he had to do, you're still part of the family. So, you know, you are dividing families because you're trying to simplify it by looking at it from, oh, they're a criminal. No, they committed a crime.
So,
you know, and then
I wanted to mention 2 things. One, you know, as you know, there's a really great video that's gone viral. I don't know the person's name. It's a Black gentleman with blonde hair that talks about how voting works. Like he was super amped about going to vote for Obama, and then he realized his community looked the same. But then he remembered how the executive and how Congress and House of Representatives really worked. And I think that not by no means to justify current administrations, but we also have to remember who has power. You know what I mean? Like we overlook local power. Like as you talk about Joe Biden participate, you know, that's his crime bill. Like no one's really focusing on the House and the Senate. It's like, oh yeah, and I will speak as from the I was super hype about Obama being, yay, Black president, boop, 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 but really not doing enough of the research to like, well, who is the person that is mitigating and who's in charge of my local community?
Right.
You get what I'm saying? So it's just like that too does a disservice to us when we focus on a higher level of power, but is dependent on a House and the House of Representatives and the Senate. Right? So that's number 1. Number 2, to another component of this system that I find to be even more, what I find hard to swallow outside of the cheap labor is like the task that people who are incarcerated have to do and then can't use the skills after they get out. right? When you hear of incarcerated people fighting fires in California, but then cannot apply to work in a firehouse, right? When you have incarcerated people burying unnamed people like John Doe's and Jane Doe's, that's fucked up. That's psychologically problematic, right? And then you also have incarcerated people who are tending to, like, I think it's tilapia farms in the Midwest. There's so much of what we integrate in our daily lives outside of the clothing. Like when you hear people who are sewing, like there are these talented seam sewers that cannot translate that into income for their families, it then puts them intentionally in a predicament to replicate the thing that they did that got them incarcerated in the first place. And so I think that's another component that needs to be considered when we talk about with the labeling, because and I'll say this last, with the labeling, it allows for people to distance themselves from others, right? That person is a criminal. I am not a criminal, right? It's like the respectability politics also gets muddied in there, because I see it with my own family. Oh no, like we can never get across that they've done something wrong, even with someone who's on drugs. They sought it out. You don't know how someone has gotten into that situation, and being presumptive doesn't help anybody at all. Again, we're trying to address humanity over circumstances.
I think that's another issue that was touched on in the chapter too, is just the way you said that your family was like, well, they've done something wrong. I think that's a common thing, a common thought amongst people. It's like, well, they've done something wrong. And the media has played such a horrible role in perpetuating these stereotypes and not really getting to the bottom of issues. Like when I read just how the media helped, like the same way it helped Trump to his presidency is the same way it's helped this fake war on drugs to mass incarceration issue becomes just exploded, because just free publicity. And like I just saw this movie, 40-year-old virgin, and like it was on Netflix, and she's talking about what is the name of the song? Poverty porn. And it was the name of the song that she was rapping about in the Netflix movie, but it's actually a thing. And it's like where people love to watch the news media because it concentrates on poverty porn. And that has to do with usually people of color committing some kind of crime, and they exacerbate it to make it seem like it's this huge issue. And that's exactly what they did with the war on drugs. They made it seem like a really small issue was this huge thing, and then you galvanize people's attitudes to support whatever you're trying to propose. And that's exactly what happened. You change people's minds, and they're like, oh, well, they're all criminals, they need to do this. And it's just this horrible cycle, and the media is just hugely to blame.
It's not just drugs. I have this running thing with the New York Times because they seem to not be able to do a story about the South Bronx without saying that the crime-ridden South Bronx, the Bronx where it was all once burning, it's like, what has that got to do with the story you're doing now? And so I constantly write them letters going, no, can't you do a story and just say the Bronx? That just really pisses me off.
Tasha, to your point, there's a minister in Philadelphia, Alan Waller, that actually has empowered a group of his young people. And I want to say teenagers to 20s. And what they're doing is bringing the local politicians in and talking about local government and what they do and how they need to elect them to get, it's like the layer, like you start locally and then you go nationally. And they just had a whole forum on that.
That's good. Like our children are not taught civics anymore or geography. And civics was so important, just knowing who your local people, are. And just moving from there all the way up to the senators and Congress people to the president, that's a lack of knowledge now. And so I think that's great that ministers doing that.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things that that's come out of this whole the Black Lives Matter, and then all of the uprising around Breonna Taylor and George Floyd is the conversation around defunding the police. And I'm embarrassed to say, here I am thinking like I know all things local politics, national politics, but I didn't know who can greenlight budgets, who can cut budgets. Like I didn't know that was pretty much something that's in the hands of our city council members and de Blasio. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously it goes back to what I think someone and many other people have said here, is that the whole thing about it kind of being rigged and like things are kind of stacked against us, because the reality of the situation is that the police union, especially the NYPD, is so powerful. And at the end of the day, like who will win? Like, will it be the collective force of the people rising up and really holding their elected officials accountable, right? And again, it wasn't ever about completely defund. It was more so like reallocate a portion, or will it be around, the NYPD union really lobbying and pushing their way and blackmailing de Blasio into submission, which it seems as if the latter is what more or less has happened. So I don't know. It just has me thinking about that as we're talking about local politics.
But the thing with the police department is, based on this war on drugs, they've gotten billions of dollars from the federal government to fight this war on drugs that they really didn't need to have, because in essence, I mean, they got billions of dollars to break up our communities. So this is why the call for defunding the police is, we're saying put that money towards social programs that you can use to uplift communities, as opposed to you giving these law enforcement officers all of this extra money to lock our people up of color.
And also we need to consider, as far as in New York City goes, the city council's role in incarceration as well. They're expanding incarceration. The fact that they've approved the building of 4 new jails in this city. And that is something that had some, pushback, but not enough. And then, this past spring with the movement against the police obviously had a lot more traction to it. But yeah, it's really focusing on politics on the local level, because it's not just mass incarceration. I know that's the emphasis of the book, but incarceration across the board includes these local jails, which get funded through and approved by our local politicians. It's not happening through the senators and through the president. It's something that could be changed on a local level. I did just want to add in as well, I think the trajectory of the past 10 years is important. This book was written 10 years ago. That is pre-Ferguson, pre-Baltimore uprisings, and then obviously this movement now. So it really kind of looks in a very different light when you consider everything that has happened in the past 10 years alone, and really the momentum that is kind of behind this movement that is happening now. Because these uprisings this past spring made 2014 seem like, child's play. So I only really see it kind of escalating there to kind of answer the question about revolution. I really do not see it de-escalating anytime soon as far as that goes.
I think so many things happen in back rooms that we don't know about. And once they come to light, they're already in the groove. They have so much momentum. There's really nothing we can do about it. When you were talking about the drugs, I mean, I live down here in Florida. I found out about this site here. And we have these horse farms down here that have been sold that are now marijuana fields. Thousands and thousands of acres. And these were brought 10, 15, 20 years ago, and they knew about it back then.
Meanwhile, our sons and fathers and brothers are serving decades for marijuana possession.
Nonviolent crimes.
I wanted to piggyback on something that Greg said about the uprising that's been going on and escalated. And I thought also about how this, the book was originally written 10 years ago, and so much has happened since that time in terms of a movement developing. And one of the things I think is interesting is that Michelle Alexander, where she talks about the use of language and all of the oppression, is part of that is to make people feel, has made people feel like nothing could be done. And that's part of the oppression. And I think she mentions that slavery didn't end and the civil rights movement didn't happen just by people legislating, but it happened because there was mass movement that was pushing for changes. And I look at that kind of movement going on now, and that gives me hope, even though it's such a hard job to think of overturning this kind of this whole capitalist system, but that incremental change and constant involvement. And I think the local is important too. There's a couple of interesting people even running for city council here in the Bronx, and in my district, it's Nino Lora, is a young Dominican activist, and she's addressing issues of racial justice and things like police in the schools. So I think that there are things that we can do and can keep doing to stay in motion, and that's what would eventually bring about some change.
I don't know. I think we've had conversations before about police in the schools and over again, and I really feel like it's important that we inform the students about police in the schools, because I feel like the adults have a tendency to have these discussions amongst each other and not involve the children who are in the schools, who need to know what's going on in these schools. Because I've seen it. I have a son, he's 12 years old, and I have these discussions with him as well. He goes to school in Harlem. And I think it's important that we start involving the children into these discussions, because they need to know what's going on as well.
Yeah, I agree. And let's not forget, this is like this period of time, 2020, this is like with the people, Black Lives Matter, and people going against the injustices, but this has been going on for 400 years. So let's take that into consideration too, because our people were not just sitting down waiting, you know, but people fought and people died, you know, from the time before, when we were kidnapped, you know, before we were kidnapped and put on the boats, all the way up until now. It's just a different type of, you know, movement. I mean, it has some similarity that it is rebellious, but it's different too. But we have to give credit to our ancestors and to the people, you know, back in the day too.
Definitely, because the thing is, with what's going on now, I hate to say this, no, I don't. What's different between now and then is, I'm gonna just go ahead and say it. White people were scared. White people were scared because they have seen, you know, they have seen the tempers go up. They were there when Trayvon Martin, you know, had all this going on. Those same people, they were there when Mike Brown had all that, you know. I mean, like, the list goes on and on. They got scared because retribution, you know what I'm saying? Retribution was coming one way or another, and it could come in your neighborhood. So for me, I don't think that it was the marches and all of the things that happened, you know, with Freddie Gray and with all of these other things, like the lady before me said, you know, they don't need to be discredited, because the involvement was pure Black and brown people, and that's why it looks like it was minuscule compared to what's happened now. People were scared.
Can I add something to that? Do you think white people are scared, or that is how they are sold on these different laws, that white people like to scare other white people so that they will keep these laws in place, so that they will continue to build jails, so that they will continue to marginalize Black people. I don't know if they're like actually scared because they, well, maybe I'm going to contradict myself. I don't know if they're actually scared because they often live in segregated communities where they try to keep their distance from Black people. Now, maybe that's a result of fear, but it seems like it's more of them being sold on the idea of this sort of Black boogeyman as opposed to them having genuine fear of Black people.
That's
Can
the
I?
thing. I mean, if it was, oh,
I
sorry, go ahead.
definitely, I think white fear comes from the internalized understanding of what we as a race have done and in our oppression and our colonization, and the idea that like if we face that, if we deal with that, you know, we're afraid that the same thing's going to be turned on us. I think internally that's what white fear is really all about. And I think the elite white people have gotten very good at playing that
Right.
button, pushing that button, and making sure. And anytime there's any movement, like she talks about in the chapter about, I believe they were called the progressives, you know, where it was interracial, it was a group together, and they had to break that down. You know, Fred Hampton was assassinated because white people, you know, in like Appalachia were listening to him. So, you know, and I think that it's a very important key to play on that white fear. And, you know, it's their fear too, because they know that the minute we all figure it out, they're out of power. You know, capitalism is done. But so yes, the fear is real, but also, yes, they are very good at manipulating that fear and creating it to be bigger and more real than it should be.
So I wanted to piggyback off of that, and then I gotta go to another meeting. But I think it's twofold, right?
Yeah, this is the last comment, I guess, because it's 8:31. Just
my bad.
Go ahead.
So like the fear is the fear of loss, and again, the more you learn about history, it's rooted in property, right? When it was dealing with enslaved Africans were property. So the loss of property, why people have guns is to protect their homes, protect their wives, which were considered property at some point. So it all boils down to that. And then on the flip of that is that there isn't enough fear of retaliation, right? For there to be the largest uprisings ever after George Floyd, and still no justice for George Floyd, and then still no justice for Breonna Taylor, it's like numbers don't really matter because they are more militarized, and there hasn't been evidence of something that can counter that. So it's the fear of loss of property and the lack of fear of retaliation that keeps these systems at bay.
Wait, and can I also add one more note, Stephanie, before you cut it? So I think, Ron, to your point, and to my other point about the media playing a huge role in people's fear or lack thereof, I think it depends upon where, you know, certain white people get their news. You know, if you watch Fox News, you're going to have a certain perception of Black and brown people being crime-ridden and problems that need to be controlled by law and order. But perhaps if you're a more progressive white individual, you may know Black people, work with them, live close to them, you understand that that's all a fallacy. And so those are the allies that marched with us during the protests. So I think that there's fear and not fear depending on the media and where you get your news. That's all.